Do preflop ranges in poker even matter? We're gonna get into all the little nuances of preflop ranges, if they matter, if they don't matter. I think you're gonna be a little bit surprised by my take on this. The first thing I wanna talk about is VPIPs. And this is for any game format, okay? Any game format of poker. VPIPs matter a lot. You need to know the threshold of how, like what percentage of hands to play in any given position. This is very important. So if you're playing too tight with your VPIPs, that's gonna hurt you a lot in the long run. If you're just folding hands that you're not supposed to be folding, that's gonna hurt a lot.
Legit decision to make. He seems to be doing a good job of tuning Tony out.
He folds.
What? After all that, he finally threw it away. What? I mean, I had a 6.
And if you're playing too wide, it might hurt you a lot as well, depending on the rake structure of wherever you're playing, whether it be a casino, whether it be an online poker room. Whatever the rake structure is, the higher the rake,
a shit-loaded rake, it's actually better.
The less hands you want to play.
I've never said that in my life.
Basically. So always keep that in mind, guys. When it comes to VPIPs, definitely study those ranges. Make sure you know exactly what you're doing with the VPIPs. If anything, in position, you can play slightly wider VPIPs. This is a very big generalization, but keep this in mind. Out of position, I would say play slightly tighter VPIPs. And the reason for that is in position, you usually are going to be more comfortable playing. You're probably going to over-realize equity in that situation. When you're out of position, it's going to be the complete opposite. Another thing that matters a lot is your frequencies, like how often you're 3-betting or going all in if you're playing like a short stacked kind of game, like a spin and go, or a short stacked heads up game, or when you get short in MTT. You need to know about what kind of hands that you should jam with. Now, it doesn't have to be an exact thing, but you need to get pretty good at understanding the short stacks. What kind of hands can you go all in with? What kind of hands should you be 3-betting? Because those things are actually very important as well. As long as you have these two things in place, your VPIPs, your 3-bet, you're going all in the right amount, you're generally speaking gonna be in good shape. But here is my issue with pre-flop ranges, guys. You don't want to be blindly following a pre-flop chart because you're gonna be leaving a lot of money on the table. So let me explain. When you're following a pre-flop chart blindly, you're like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to raise with this hand. I'm supposed to do this with this hand. I'm supposed to do that with this hand. Whatever, it doesn't matter what the range is telling you to do. What you're failing to do is observe the people that you're playing against and adjust to them accordingly. There might be some players where you don't want to 3-bet certain type of hands. Maybe you want to go post flop with these guys because they're playing really, really, really bad. And then maybe there's some guys that you want to 3-bet more hands than you normally would because these guys are opening too wide and then they're folding too much when you 3-bet them, or they're playing too passively post flop in those situations. There's lots of different reasons to do different things. There are some guys when you're playing a short stack game, you might want to limp in instead of go all in, especially in position, because you want to get to play them post flop. So there's lots of different things. So if you're just looking at pre-flop ranges and you're deciding to just play a static pre-flop strategy,
you're making a big mistake.
You want to look at pre-flop ranges to understand the boundaries, the VPIPs of what you should be doing in every single spot, no matter the game format. You want to know about how much you should be 3-betting and stuff like that, what your 4-bet range should look like in general. You want to have a generalization of how pre-flop should be played, but you want to leave a lot of room to adjust and exploit your opponents. And this holds more true like the lower in stakes you go, the more you do not want to use a pre-flop range chart. The higher in stakes you go, it becomes more arguable. But when you're playing low and mid stakes, there are so many exploits and adjustments you should be making versus your opponents. And if you use a pre-flop chart or pre-flop ranges, you study your pre-flop ranges, you're memorizing them, you're doing yourself a massive disservice and you're gonna do worse off. You can take my word on that one. Other examples of adjusting for pre-flop could be, for example, you open a hand and somebody 3-bets you. You know what the 4-bet range is pre-flop, like you know like what the bluff should be or whatever, but this guy 3-betting you basically just 3-bets only the nuts, you know? If somebody's only 3-betting aces, kings, queens, jacks, ace, king, and maybe ace, queen, throw it in there every once in a while. Somebody has a 3-betting range like that, which is quite common, honestly. Like, especially if you're playing live poker, it's very common. Then not only you don't want to 4-bet any bluffs, you only want to 4-bet value, ace, king plus, queens plus, basically, versus a player like that. But you also want to defend a lot tighter, especially if you're not super deep stacked. Now, if you're playing like an MTT or something or a cash game and you're like over 100 big blinds deep, maybe you still want to peel versus this player with like 6-5 suited, 5-4 suited, because if you crack their overpair, you're probably gonna get paid in a big way, right? But if you're playing like 20, 30 big blinds, whatever, you want to just toss your hands into the muck quite a lot. Like, just hands that you know that you should be defending in theory, right? In theory, you should be defending these hands. But if you have a read that your opponent is only 3-betting very strong premium cards, you don't ever want to be defending marginal hands. Like, let's say, for example, maybe you have like an ace 10 off and you're like, I'm definitely going to toss this one away. King, queen off, those kind of hands. Get out of the way, guys. Get out of the way. These guys are not bluffing you. Okay, that's just one example. There's tons of examples. There could be examples of guys that maybe are 3-betting a lot, but then when they don't hit their hand, they just check fold. Like, you know, there's lots of different reads you can get on your opponents. The biggest thing to do if you want to be a pre-flop master, I'm talking about if you want to be the king of pre-flop.
King in the castle, king in the castle.
Pay very close attention to what your villains are doing. Whether it's 1 villain, 2 villains like in a spin and go, or 7 or 8 villains like in a cash game or an MTT. You want to be as aware as you can as to what's going on at the tables and how you should alter your pre-flop strategy versus different kind of players at the table. Very, very important. More important than any pre-flop ranges, guys. Way more important. So overall, pre-flop ranges, absolutely, they matter. They do matter. You need to get the VPIPs down right. You don't want to be, especially if you're like playing way too tight of a VPIP, even just a little bit too tight of a VPIP, especially if you're a good player, you consider yourself a really good player, the more VPIP you should play. Of course, there's a limit to this, guys. Don't go crazy. You can't just play anything you want. That's not smart. There's certain hands, no matter how good you are, you're just going to lose. You can play slightly more VPIP than pre-flop charts in position. And I would say either the same VPIP with pre-flop charts out of position or slightly tighter. Just slight, guys. But you should never copy pre-flop ranges. You should never try to mimic a pre-flop range, because I find a lot of people when they're playing poker, they'll try to copy specifically what a pre-flop range is. Oh, I know pre-flop, I'll do this. I know this is what GTO would do or whatever.
Say no to GTO.
Without taking into any account this player that they're playing against. It's absolutely shocking to me, guys, when this happens. I play on cash games now on WPT Global, and there are a few players consistently, guys, that are like calling 4-bet jams pre-flop for like 200 big blinds with like ace jack off versus recreational players.
Oh, I'm sorry about this, Sonny, but I'm in.
That are playing a strategy of like a 25% VPIP and 4% PFR. There is no sense in this, guys. These guys always show up with queens, kings, or aces, or ace, king at worst. It just goes to show you, you cannot just copy a pre-flop chart. Study the pre-flop charts, but understand that the pre-flop charts are not the end-all, be-all of your pre-flop strategy. They should just be a foundation for the pre-flop strategy. And then you use that foundation, and once you get reads on players, you start adjusting, you start playing differently, so you can take full advantage of the people at the table against you. And this is the way you're gonna maximize your pre-flop EV. If you like this video, give it a like, share it with your friends, let them know. Guys, pre-flop matters, but it kinda doesn't. Take care.